Hey guys, so today I'm gonna do things a little bit different since I don't have this day in history and word of the day finished yet. I'm gonna start off by reading a few chapters from Redwall, and hopefully by the time that it's done uploading, I'll have this day in history finished and word of the day. So without further ado, let's find out what is happening with Mathis. The sun's first rays flung wide the gate. The sun's first rays flung wide the gates of dawn. The inhabitants of Redwall were already up and about. After breakfast, the abbot issued daily orders. All those not employed defending the abbey would husband the crops and gather supplies for the larders in the event of a prolonged siege. Young otters collected watercress and fished. Cornflower headed a party of mice to reap the early cereal crops. More youngsters tended the salad gardens. The bright summer morning hummed to the bustle of indigenous woodlanders. And Bush Spike, excuse me, now sufficiently recovered, sat in the storeroom, taking stock. Lots of nuts and preserved berries from last autumn, apples and pears aplenty. Unfortunately, the hedgehog could not check the cellars. Brother Edmund and Fuhrer Hugo had the only two keys. He licked his lips at the thought of barrels of nut brown ale, strong cider, creamy stout, and the little kegs, the dear little kegs, full of elderberry wine, mulberry brandy, blackcurrant port, and wild grape sherry. You're an edge peg. Where am us putting these roots and dandelions? Aston up them rotten Evie. Ambush sighed wistfully as he attended the two moles staggering under a bundle of dandelions and tubers. Our old ladle tatters steady, Bill. Yar tip 'em, Lego. More baby moles. Ambrose pawed the bandage on his wound. The hedgehog's work was never done. Mathis and Constance stood in the cloisters. They had taken charge of weapon training. The woodlanders were each showing off their special skills. In more peaceful day, these skills had only been used at fairs and sporting contests, but now, when the need arose, they would be used with more deadly effect. The otters carried bags of smooth pebbles, which they hurled from vine slings with great force and accuracy. Groups of field mice, archers, knocked thistledown shafts to the string of their longbows. Many meandering birds had been driven off these same tiny archers. Bands of Redwall mice practiced a thrust and parry with steves. Below the wall on the abbey grass, Fulmo directed his crew as they dug a trench. This was lined with sharpened stakes by a solitary beaver. A system of ropes and pulleys carried the baskets of stone and trench debris up the ramparts. Defenders pulled it in heaps at the edge of the parapet. Mathis took a group of Redwall mice to instruct in the use of quarterstaff. He had discovered in himself a natural skill with a long ash pole. None of the mice have ever carpeted in any type of violent sport. They were awkward and timid. But as it was a personal choice between learning and Coolidge, and wrestling from Constance or quarterstaff from Mathis, to a mouse, they had opted for the latter. Mathis found he had to be quite severe with them. Accordingly, he dealt out some hefty blows and hard falls to make the more timid souls angry enough to retaliate. Excuse me. Keep that head guarded, Brother Anthony. Twack. I warned you, brother. Now look out, I'm coming after you again. Twack. No, don't just stand there, brother. Defend yourself. Hit out at me. Twack crack. This time Mathis sat down hard. Rubbing dazedly at his sore head, Constance chuckled. Well, Mathis, you've only yourself to blame. You asked Brother Anthony to hit out at you, and my word, he certainly did. Or he certainly obliged. I'll have to recruit him for my gradual class. He shows promise. Excuse me. Mathis stood up, smiling ruefully. He rested his staff. Yes, he is very strong, but I do wish we had some real weapons for war. Swords and daggers and the likes. And such like. We won't kill many rats with wooden staves. Maybe not, the badger replied, but you must remember that we are here to defend, not to attack or kill. Mathis threw down his staff. He took a deep dipper of water from an oaken pail, drinking deeply, then splashed the remaining over his aching head. A wise observation, Constance. But you try and telling that to Cluny and his hold. See how far you get. Lunch that day was served out in the orchard. Mathis lined up with the other woodland creatures to collect his food. A bowl of fresh milk, a hunk of wheaten loaf, and some goat's milk. And some goat's milk cheese. Cornflower was serving. She gave Mathis an extra large wedge of cheese. He rolled up the sleeve of his habit and pulled out the corner of her scarf. Oh, look, Cornflower, a very close friend gave me this last night. She laughed. Get along and eat your lunch, warrior mouse, or show you my deadly aim with a piece of this cheese. Strolling through the dampened shade of the orchard, Mathis scouted out old Methuselah, slumping down beneath a damson tree. The young mouse munched away at his lunch. Meluth was sitting with his back against the tree, his eyes closed, an apparent doze. Without opening, he addressed Mathis. "How goes the practice war, young stave master?" Mathis watched some of the tiny ants carry off his fallen breadcrumbs as he answered, "As well as possible, Brother Methus." "And how are your studies coming along?" Meluth squinted over the top of his spectacles. "Knowledge is a thing that one cannot have enough of. It is the fruit of wisdom. It can be eaten carefully and digested fully. Unlike that lunch you are bolting down, little friend." Mathis set his food to one side. "Tell me, what knowledge have you digested lately, old one?" Meluth took a sip from Mathis's milk bowl. "Sometimes I think you have a very old head for such a young mouse. What more do you wish to know about Martin the warrior?" Mathis looked surprised. "How did you know I was going to ask about Martin?" Meluth wrinkled his nose. How do the bee folk know there is pollen in a flower? Ask anyway, young one, before I doze off again." Mathis hesitated a moment, then blurted out, "Brother Meluth, tell me where Martin lies buried." The old mouse chuckled dryly. "Next you're going to ask me where to find the great sword of the warrior mouse. But how did you know that?" stammered Mathis. The ancient gatehouse keeper shrugged his thin shoulders. "The sword must lie buried with Martin. You would have little use of the dusty bones of a bygone hero. A simple dedication, even for one as old as I am. A simple deduction, even for one as old as I am. Then you know where the warrior lies." Methus shook his head. "That is one thing no creature knows. For many years now, I have puzzled and pored over the ancient manuscripts, translating, following hidden trails, always with the same result, nothing. I have even used my gift of tongues, speaking to the bees and others who can go into places too small for us. But always the same. Rumors, legend, and even old mouse tales." Mathis crumbled more bread for the ants. "Then the warrior sword only is a fable." Methus leaned forward indignantly. "Who said that? Did I?" "No, but you." "Bah, nothing of the sort, young mouse. Listen carefully to me. I have an uncanny feeling that you may be the one I've been saving this vital piece of information for." Mathis forgot about his lunch. He listened attentively. "About 4 summers ago." Now remember, in the beginning we said that years when they are talking about years, they don't say years, they say summers, or 4 springs, or whatever the case may be. So this is 4 years ago, okay? I traded a sparrowhawk who had pulled a sinew in her foot. She could not use her talons properly. As I remember, I made her promise never to take a mouse as prey. She was a fierce, frightening bird. Have you ever been close up to a sparrowhawk? No, of course you haven't. Well, let me tell you, they can hypnotize small creatures with those savage golden eyes. Born killers they are. But this hawk said something that made me think. She talked about the sparrows, called them winged mice, said that many years ago they had stolen something from our abbey, a treasure that belonged to the mice. Wouldn't say what it was, just flew off. Who expects gratitude from a sparrowhawk anyway? Mathis interrupted. Have you ever spoken to the sparrows about this something? Mathis shook his head. I'm too old. I can't climb up to the roof where they nest. Besides, the sparrows are odd birds, forever quarreling and chattering on their strange voices. They are warlike creatures, extremely forgetful and completely savage. They'd throw you from the roof and kill you before you had a chance to get near their tribal nest. Yes, I am far too old for that sort of thing, Mathis. And anyhow, I am not sure that the sparrowhawk story was true. Some birds can be dreadful liars when they have the mind to be. Mathis tried to question Brother Mathus further, but the warm sun had worked its magic upon the old gatekeeper as he sat in the orchard savoring the peace and tranquility of the June afternoon. This time there was no deception. He was generally fast asleep. Chapter 14. Clouds drifted across the sky, obscuring the thin silver sliver of the moon. Joseph Bell trolled out as its midnight message to the slumbering countryside. A warm, soft drizzle was falling over the perched meadows and dried woodland, bringing relief after the hot, dry day, damping down the dust from the road. And the drenched frog opened its eyes, disturbed by some light noise from the hedgerow. It blinked. It was that 3 figures creeping along, or 2. The frog remained perfectly still. There seemed to be 2 figures in some sort of shadow. The moon came out from behind a cloud. It was 2 huge rats and a dark, shadowy something. They crept under the cover of the hedge towards the big dwelling of the mouse folk. Rats were hunters, thankfully. Thankfully, they had not noticed him. The frog stayed motionless and let them pass. It was none of his business. Cluny, Wager, and Shadow padded noiselessly towards Redwall. This was such an important mission that Cluny had decided to come along to supervise it personally. Around Shadow's waist was strapped a skin pouch. It contained a thin, strong rope, a padded grappling hook, a vial of oil, some lock picks, and a dagger, Shadow's usual burglaring kit. Wager ambled proudly along, throwing that he had been specially picked to accompany his chief on such a vital task. Little did he know that Cluny only included him on as insurance. If they should get into a tight corner, Wager would serve as an expendable fool. That way, Cluny could make good his own escape. The trio hauled beneath the lofty abbey walls. Cluny silenced them with a wave of his tail, then vanished into the night. Wager felt distinctively nervous at being left alone with Shadow. He attempted to whispered conversation. "Nice drops of rain, eh, Shadow? Good for the grass. Below me, these walls are pretty high. I'm glad that you're climbing them and not me. I'd never make it. Too fat, haha." Wager's voice trailed off. He fumbled with his whiskers, wilting beneath the basilisk stare of Shadow's dead black eyes. He shuddered and fell silent. Within 10 minutes, Cluny was back. He nodded up at the parapet. "I've been up and down the length of the wall for a fair distance. The sensory mice are all asleep, the fools. They've never had to do guard duty before. As soon as night falls, so do their eyelids. That's what soft living does for you." Wager's head bobbed in agreement. "You're right, Chief. If they were in our army, old Regtooth caught them snoozing, he'd shut your trap, stupid." Cluny hissed. "Are you ready, Shadow? Now don't forget your instructions." Shadow bared his yellowed fangs and started climbing. Slowly he made his way upwards. Like the long black reptile, his claws leaked hidden niches and crevices in the sandstone. Ever upwards, sometimes stopped. Spread eagle against the surface as he figured out his next movement, taking full advantage of every crack and joint in the wall. No other animal in Cluny's army would have attempted such an ascent, but Shadow was a climbing expert. He constructed his whole being on the job in hand, sometimes clinging to the stone by no more than a single claw. Below, on the ground, Cluny and Wager strained their eyes upwards. They could barely make out his shape. He was not far from the top of the wall. Shadow shifted positions and levered with his back legs and tail. Now he wedged his claws into the fissure and stretched upwards, gaining inch by inch. On top of the wall, Brother Edmund was snoring gently. He was nestled in a pile of rubble, wrapped in a warm blanket, with his hood up against the light rain. Edmund was oblivious to the long, sharp claws that latched themselves over the parapet edge. A moment later, a sleek, black head appeared. Two dense, obsidian eyes stared at the sleeping mouse. Shadow had succeeded in climbing the abbey wall. Like a sinus black lizard, he slithered past slumbering creatures and around rubble and heaps, never once making a sound. Fear Hugo mumbled gently in his sleep and moved his head so that his cowl slid off. Drizzle fell upon the fat Fear's face, threatening to wake him. Gently as the night breeze, Shadow replaced the hood. Pausing for an instant, Shadow looked about before descending the stone steps for the ramparts to the cloisters, using shrubs and bushes as cover. He moved fiercely forward, never taking any needless chances or making sudden movements. Sometimes he stopped and waited, letting the minutes tick away as he planned his next progression. Gliding like a cloud's shadow cast upon the ground by the moon. The door to the great hall was not locked. Shadow judged that the latch was probably old and creaky. He took out the vital oil and lubricant, lubricated the latch and hinges. Carefully, he inched the door ajar. Apart from a tiny squeak, it swung effortlessly open. Sliding inside, he released the door by mistake. A swift night breeze slammed it shut with a dull thud. Shadow cursed inwardly and flung himself behind a nearby pillar. He lay inert, not daring to breathe. 1, 2, 3 minutes. Good. Nobody had been disturbed by the noise. He ventured out to inspect the tapestry that hung upon the wall. A black moth on a moonless night would not have escaped Shadow's notice. He needed no lamp to scrutinize the thing before him. This was the picture of the warrior mouse that Cluny lusted after. Using his razor-sharp fangs, he began gnawing into the ancient tapestry, working from the threshold hem upwards. Mathis tossed and turned in his bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. His mind revolved around the host of problems and schemes. The sword, Martin's grave defense of Abbey, Cornflower. Finally, after much kicking and rumpling the sheets, sleep started to take over. He was somewhere in long deserted room, Not unlike Great Hall. A voice called to him, "Mathis." "Oh, go away," the young mouse muttered drowsily. "Get someone else, I'm tired." But the voice persisted, boring into his mind. "Mathis, Mathis, I need you." He peered down the length of the darkened wall. What is it? Why do you need me?" Mathis began to walk towards the voice. He could hear a wicked sneer followed by a cry of despair. "Mathis, help! Don't let them take me." He frowned. He ran forward. The hall seemed to grow longer. "Who are you? Where are you?" Far ahead, the murky darkness, Mathis could vaguely distinguish a figure leaning out from the wall. It was a mouse in armor. "Please, Mathis, you must help me quickly." Bump! Mathis landed on the floor of his bedroom. Sheets were tangled about his body. Slowly he sat up and rubbed his eyes. What a strange dream. A long hall, the plea for help, the armored mouse. Mathis felt the fur on the back of his neck rising. Of course, it had to be. Great Hall. Martin the warrior. Something terrible was going on downstairs. He was needed urgently. Mathis kicked the sheets from him as he leaped up and dashed headlong from the bedroom, along the dormitory corridor, and helter-skelter down the spiral staircase. Through cavern hole, he clattered in the darkness, stumbling and tripping over furniture, his heart hammering loudly and his legs pumping like two pistons. Mathis fell over the top stair and went sprawling into Great Hall. He lay on the floor, gazing through the gloom into the tapestry. Martin was still there, but he was moving. Was it the breeze? No, it couldn't be. The likeness of the warrior mouse was jiggling about as though it were being tugged in some way. Mathis could see a shadow, but there was nothing to cast it. He jumped to his feet and ran forward as the picture of Martin whipped away from the tapestry. A rat held it. There was no doubt in Mathis's mind. It was a rat entirely black from tip to tail, barely distinguishable from the night itself. Shadow heard the footsteps on the floor behind him. With cold, calculated detachment, he wheeled about his opponent charged. He was certain to defeat such a small creature in combat, but his orders were to get the picture, not to fight little mice. Besides, there was always the additional hazard that the mouse might hang onto him and shout for help until it came. Like a wreath of oily smoke, Shadow completely a clever double maneuver, bowling his body into a forward roll. He knocked Mathis down like a skittle. Bounding up, he slipped around the door, slamming it, and fled through the cloisters. Mathis sprang up. "Stop that rat! Stop that rat!" Immediately, the mice on sentry duty were alerted. As Shadow ran, he saw Constance dash across the ground at an angle, which cut him off from the stairs up to the ramparts. Switching direction, he made for the next set of stairs, slightly cursing the badger. Now he could have to use his climbing rope to descend quickly to the road. Mathis emerged from the abbey. He saw Shadow change direction. Thinking fast, he ran diagonally to catch up with the thief at the foot of the stairs. Throwing himself into a flying tackle, Mathis grabbed Shadow by the legs, sending him crashing on the lower steps. Still clinging to the tapestry, Shadow wriggled like an eel. Turning over on his back, he kicked savagely at the young mouse's head with a free foot. Mathis tried violently to hang on, but his larger and heavier counterpart kicked him viciously in the face, again and again. The big bony foot, with its sharp claws, pounding and gouging away, soon took its toll. Mathis went limp and blacked out. Constance had mounted the far steps, gaining the ramparts. She ran along, dodging the heaps of rubble. She saw Mathis go down under the onslaught of kicks and ran even faster, impeded by mice all around, who scattered in panic, thinking that they were under mass invasion. The only one besides Constance who had the sense to see what was happening was Cornflower's father. But being nearer to the top of the stairs than the badger, he ran straight into the intruder. Shadow was struggling to get his climbing rope. "Surrender, rat. I got you," cried Mr. Fieldmouse as he grabbed hold of the thief. But rumbling in his pouch to free the rope, Shadow's claw had closed on the handle of his dagger. He drew out swiftly and drove it twice into the field mouse's unprotected body. Constance arrived just as the victim fell wounded. Shadow turned on her with the dagger upraised. Constance swung her paw round in a mighty arc. It caught Shadow square on the chin. The force of the blow lifted the thief clean off his feet, and before Constance could grab hold of him, he overbalanced and hurled over the edge of the parapet with a horrible scream. Downward he plunged, his body thudded off the unyielded masonry. He landed in a wet roadway with a sickening crunch. Cloney came dashing towards the shrunken Shadow, with Rager scuttling in his wake. Despite his appealing injuries, Shadow managed to lever himself up on one paw. "Cloney, I'm hurt. Help me." The piece of tapestry lay upon the road. Cloney scattered it up eagerly. Behind him, he could hear the gatehouse bolts being withdrawn, amid the shouts of angry mice. Ruthlessly, he kicked at Shadow's broken body. "Get up and run for it, or stay there, fool. I don't carry cripples or badgers or burglars," leaving the injured Shadow to the mice. Cloney sped off across the road. He covered the width of the ditch with a mighty leap and ran off across the meadows. In open country, he could outdistance any mice that dared follow him. Waving the tapestry, Cloney laughed in exhilaration as he pulled and on extra bursts of speed. Rager had panicked completely. He could not jump the ditch, so he skirted off down the road in the opposite direction from the way they had come. A group of mice led by Brother Off tried forging the ditch and climbing up the meadow. Unfortunately, the rain had made the going hard and slippery. Cluny was long gone, and the tapestry with him. Turning back to Redwall, the pursuers came upon Mathis. He was leaning on Fiora Hugo's arm in a dazed condition. Painfully, he staggered up the road to where Shadow laid. Wincing, he cast about, searching the muddy roadway for the fragment of tapestry. "It's got to be here somewhere," cried Mathis. He fell open upon the injured Shadow, searching his waist pouch. His flat black eyes clouding over. Shadow watched Mathis. Laconlandly he spoke. His voice was strangely calm. "Too late, Mouse. Martin is with Cluny now." It was the last thing Shadow ever said. He gave one final shudder and lay dead. And tomorrow I'm going to be picking up on chapter 15. Until next time.